good, and the assistant on the wing kept holding it down every time I took off. It was an experiment in minimum structure. There's no thrust drag spars or anything in the wing, it's simply a V. This is number 6, 32-foot span, about 200 square feet. Little launch problem there. We eventually did get it flying pretty well. It started out with elevons for control, and then we ended up with tip drag rudders and weight shift for pitch. The airframe was too flexible for the elevons. Shortened the fuselage there and put a skid on it to aid in launch. Not quite enough airspeed on the first hop. What happened is the control wires pulled the wing forward instead of the elevons up in the final flights. Let's see how they work there. Team effort to get it flying. What happened here is I pulled back on the stick and the wings moved forward rather than pulling the elevons up, so it ended up diving in pretty hard. Not really didn't really get hurt or anything. So we increased the reflex a little bit, got rid of the elevons and put tip rudders on it. To get quite a few good flights out of it. Now the next flight, you see, when you get the speed up, the LOD was really pretty good. It's about 8.5 or 9 to 1, with 200 square feet of wing area at an incredibly low sink rate. That was in 1974. We almost put that into production. But in those days, hang gliders were standard Regalo variety, and people were flying at 45-mile-an-hour winds. They didn't know how to limit themselves to reasonable winds. This is the same glider. We put a tail skid on it to help in ground handling, and took it out to the beach. Getting longer and longer flights out of it up on the sand dunes. See, it's got a pretty low sink rate. There's very little wind that day. In the late fall, you can see the hang gliders being carried up. There's almost no wind. The days were short, so we ended up flying into evening in the fall weather. Example of stall recovery. Control response was amazingly good with those top rudders. Originally, I just put them up there to avoid damaging them on landing, and we accidentally got into some winglet effect. This is number 7. It was an experiment to test a free airfoil. Has no ribs. 20-foot span, 8-foot chord. We ended up with an elevator, 12 feet in span and 4 feet in chord to control the center of pressure. The airfoil was quite unstable, but we managed to get a few good flights out of it, and it showed that the free airfoil did work and created a good high lift coefficient. That airplane was built on a Saturday and flown on Sunday, disassembled on Monday because it never was very good. The flat wing did respond to weight shift control, though. If we'd been braver, we could have taken it on a bigger hill, but we weren't. We learned what we wanted to out of it. Design number 8, which didn't get built, and then number 9, which will be shown in a minute, which was the practical use of what this airplane proved. It was not a very good day. The wind was crosswise to the hill, and there was very little of it. You can see the state-of-the-art of hang gliders on the top of the hill at that time. Standard hang glider, Regalo. That was about as much flying as we ever did, 3 or 4 seconds at a time with that airplane. Bear to handle on the ground. If the wind got under a wing, you couldn't bring it down. Now, I think this guy here let it get away from it. No. There, you can see the weight shift control working in that shot. That it would respond turning. Now, this is number 9, which has a free airfoil with elevons and an enclosed fuselage. Didn't get quite enough flying speed on that one, but here we go, we got a little extra speed and pull up. Had foot pedals in the front of the cockpit and a mixer on the elevons, so you had up and down and aileron roll control. This flight here, you get a good shot of the retractable landing gear. Actually, it's pretty easy to launch if you had just enough wind to help it start to fly. You can see the Weedhopper structure in that wing, thrust drag spar and the compression struts. This landing I got a little too low and sideways and folded up the fuselage, but it wasn't structural, so we flew it without it. Here's a good shot of that Weedhopper wing structure again. It's kind of a strange airplane. I think we were getting some Casper effect out of it, because the more we slowed it down, the better it glided. The lower the sink rate got. This is a training hill, and in this airplane on that day, we set a new record. Well, actually, it was the first airplane ever to soar the hill. I stayed up a minute and a half, and 11 to 14 mile an hour wind. The elevons weren't quite big enough, and you notice to get it to roll, I have to drop the nose, relax some of the up pressure to get the roll function to work. But look at the sink rate there, how low it is. It's a very pleasant plane to fly. It only weighed 45 pounds. It's a Seagull 3 attempting to stay up, but stalling, trading airspeed for duration, and ends up in a stall. I had an airspeed indicator under the nose in this thing. It was reading 11 miles an hour when I slowed it down. You can see how slow the roll response is there, and drop the nose a little bit and get it to roll. You can see the elevons working. That airplane had an aspect ratio of 5, and I compared it to another flying wing a fellow had built a couple weeks later, which had an aspect ratio of 10, but wingtips very much like a Quicksilver, just cut off with the airfoil, ran right out to the end. With this one, they had droop tips and a boxed wing, cupped wingtip like a Weedhopper. And the sink rate with identical wing loading was slightly better with this airplane with a lower aspect ratio. So those wingtips really do work. This is the soaring flight, or managed to stay up. Now you see the inadequate roll and pitch. Where he had spanked, and to get it to roll, I have to drop the nose, but I'm too low to really drop the nose, so I end up in kind of a hot landing. But it's all right. We had a rescue crew there the other way. Now this is the same airplane. I put tip rudders on it and coupled them in with the elevons to help it turn. Put a Dacron cover on it and ribs to control the center of pressure, so I had more roll response with pitch. But the Dacron couldn't fly anywhere near as well as the smooth plastic. You can see the sink rate never quite gets as low as the other one. It just won't slow down. It's interesting to fly the same airframe with the two different covering methods. It really gives a graphic demonstration of how important the low porosity of that plastic is and how poor the Dacron actually is. See, it's flying much faster. Stall speed was indicating 14 this way, and it was 11 with the plastic. That's like 30% more lift coefficient with the plastic. I could have easily soared that hill if it had plastic cover on it that day. This airplane in a later version was considered for production, but we found that hang glider pilots were more impressed with exaggerated performance claims than the safety of having reasonable controls. This is an interesting plane, number 11. An experiment to see how light you could build an airplane without it breaking, how weak. Those spars would fail at 150 foot-pounds maximum bending load. You can see it's somewhat less than that, or it would have broken, but I didn't know how badly it was flexing that day until I saw these films. And some of the flights got a little high. You can even see the compression spars bowing under the load. It's all Douglas fir. It's a good example of how much wood can really take, how much strength margin you have. This is number 12. It's just a smaller version of number 6, 30-foot span, 5.5-foot chord. An excellent flying airplane, weighed 52 pounds. Good speed range. I was using the closed wingtips and straight bar at the tip like the Weedhopper has. On this flight, I ended up losing it in the surf because I tried to land at the bottom and couldn't get out of the lift. Got out over the rocks and I had to turn back and ended up landing in about 2 feet of water, but the wave action just washed out from underneath me and destroyed it. Number 13 went through a lot of variations. Right here it has a hinged keel, and I was experimenting with moving the keel up and down and right and left for an aerodynamic control function on a hang glider. The idea being, at that point I was thinking towing would be the ultimate answer to ultralight flying because power units had to be licensed. And an aerodynamic control would allow you to tow with greater safety than just throwing your weight around. You see, my flight testing is very cautious. A lot of running up and down the hill at very low altitudes. I found on this experiment that the pitch control worked pretty well to hold the nose down, very poorly to pull it up, and almost non-existent moving the keel side to side. The attempt to tighten one side, you can see the control system there. Had a lot of fun with that overhead control stick. It didn't feel right. I'd want to push forward to make the nose go up, but that made it go down. So a lot of the testing here was getting myself used to the control system. That glider had an interesting leading edge where the fabric wrapped around it but didn't have a pocket. Wrapped around it was riveted and bonded on, and eventually it gave a very high lift coefficient for a regalo. Now here it has strings that are tied from the batten to the seat, so I move forward, it pulls both treading edges down. I move to one side, it just pulls one down for an aileron effect. And I was able to camber the wing to an almost unstable pitch condition, but when I pushed back, if it started to dive, push back, it would flatten the wing out and be pitch positive again. It was quite responsive, quite a bit more effective than hinging the keel, and a lot easier. That little tab rudder helped it limited to some spiral instability I was getting. Here's an example of wind speed gradient. You don't want to get caught doing that. This shows how the cables work, but it also, to the treading edge, but it also has an interesting panel in the center, which gives the keel more of a cambered airfoil rather than just a straight airfoil. I reasoned that the center section was stalled most of the time in a regalo wing because of the twist, and the center section flew at a high angle. Look at the landing characteristics. I flared as I normally would have, and the lift was considerably higher. It raised the lift-over drag ratio considerably and lowered the sink dramatically. I also flattened the wing out a little bit, just after these photos were taken for less washout, and improved the control, the L over D, and lowered the sink rate a little bit more. That glider would set up in 2.5 minutes and tear down in 1.5 minutes. Weighed 42 pounds. I probably put more time on that than any hang glider I had. Here, pulling my feet up, reducing the frontal area. Glide angle is right around 7 to 1. Incredible ability to slow down for landing. Later experiments with cambering the leading edge a little bit, flattening the sail a little bit more, and sealed the leading edges. I got it up to almost 8 to 1 glide, which is really incredible for its dimensions. It was a 102-degree nose angle and an 18-foot leading edge and 12-foot keel, which is basically an intermediate layout. But 8 to 1 glide is definitely a high-performance hang glider. That's what wheels are for. It's a hot-shot hang-4 pilot who was working for us. This is number 15. It's built like a regalo wing, but each rib in the sail is aluminum tubing. It has a wire running from the treading edge to the control bar, so there's no rush out when it flies. It weighed 52 pounds, took 12 minutes to set up, and showed some real promise. It's got spoilerons for control. With no dihedral, the spoilerons produced a lot of skidding at high speeds and over low speeds. So I'm not too pleased with them as a control system. Dihedral would have smoothed that out and increased the response at high speeds. You can see how flat that wing is. Even with poorly controlled trailing edge, you can see it fluttering there. I needed some sail work. Even with that, the LOD was up around 8.5 or 9. 34-foot span. 140-degree nose angle, I think it was, with 18-foot leading edges and a truncated tip. You can see how those Spoilerons work almost too well at low speeds. I did do some soaring with it, but it had a tendency to slide off to the side. Now this is number 16. It's aluminum tubing and Dacron version of the earlier number 9, which was plastic and wood. It has much larger ailerons or elevons to allow me to flare and roll the airplane at the same time. I still have this glider. I haven't flown it in a long time, though. Interestingly, it was designed for the same ultimate stress, but it was 20 pounds heavier, 65 pounds. The wooden one was 45 pounds. Wood is a better material. It's hard to get a lot of high-quality wood for production. Now you can see here in these pictures, there's no trouble at all rolling the plane, turning it, and flaring it at the same time, getting it slowed down. This is the same airplane with paint job on the wings. Now, I'd experimented towing this, and I found the aerodynamic controls made towing, launching, and everything just really easy. Matter of fact, there's a rope on that shot there. I had just one of my friends running with the rope to pull. The launches are extremely easy because the rope pulls you along and you just sort of sit down. This guy did the same thing all day. I think just, it was a kit built Regalo rigged wrong. There's a good example of tow into a wind shear, back down through the wind shear, and then diving to get out of the lift so you could land before going into the water. This is number 18, which is number 15 actual, the sail in a different frame. Most modern gliders are using this now. The crossbar is holding the ribs down, so there's no washout in the center section. And you can see it's beginning to exhibit some good low sink characteristics. There's almost no wind there that day. You can see after it lands, the sail just hangs. I sold the production rights of that to a company called True Flight, but they were having financial troubles and they had not changed from their standard Regalo soon enough, and they ended up going out of business. Again, the wheels. I manufactured those wheels after I had some plastic lawnmower wheels break when I crashed, and I chipped a tooth, so I went out and made a mold for myself. Ended up selling plastic wheels for hang gliders for a while. If this looks like a lot of work, it is. I'm so glad engines came along. Now, this is number 19, and it was I called it Gigantis Maximus. It was 40-foot span, 6-foot, 3-inch cord, 230 square feet wing area. Had a direct drive McCulloch. This day, zero wind, very hot. I never did get it to fly, but I did, at a later date, manage to get it airborne at 3/4 throttle. Then when I got the throttle corrected, I whip-stalled it and crashed it. This was just before moving back to Utah. Now this is landing gear as a swivel wing main gear, so it allows you to crab into a wind to keep the wings level even though you're going sideways on the ground. You can see it there. I was getting 50 to 55 pounds of thrust out of that little McCulloch, and it really was pretty marginal. And at this point in time, I only had 75% of the throttle opening. I wasn't getting all the power out of it. This is a straight leading edge flying wing, too, with a reflexed airfoil like number 6 and number 12. Blowing about 10 mile an hour headwind. Managed to get some hops out of it. That's weed hopping, the truest sense. The airframe itself only weighed 62 pounds because it was very light, only had a maximum safety factor of 2.5. You can see there at 75% throttle, it was managing to hang on. If I had full throttle on that flight, I'd been fine. I crashed it later that day with full throttle. Now this is an experiment on weight shift control. There's no control over that thing except shifting the weight of the fuselage back and forth. I went through several different configurations before reaching this. But I proved that you don't have to have a flexible wing to be able to control it by shifting your weight. Actually, the control you can see here is very positive. Even in the middle of a stall, it'll turn. This is before the FAA had made the ruling that powered hang gliders didn't have to be licensed. And I was looking at building a rigid wing weight shift control glider that could be towed with a winch as the ultimate low-cost flying machine. See, that roll rate is incredible. It's better than aerodynamically controlled models of the same size that I've had in the past. Right down close to the ground and no hesitation to respond even at low speeds. As a matter of fact, near stall it seems to respond better. You can see the roll there. The idea is the weight shifts off to the side, and since the weight is the thrust on a glider, that shoves that wing forward. The anhedral causes it to go down. This is number 20. Full-size experiment of the weight shift control. The anhedral wing is very close to the neutral there, and the wing was flexing for wash-in. There's some structural corrections that had to be made. But it worked, and the weight shift worked. You begin to see some characteristics of the Weedhopper too, the strut bracing and elimination of wires. It's interesting, the airplanes really don't weigh anymore. Not appreciably, you know, like 2 or 3 pounds more to use struts than wires, but they're so much easier to set up and build accurately. It's number 21. It's built to replace number 13 after I wore it out. That was the red one. I stretched the sail on it. Now this one had an interesting sail cut. Actually had negative billow. That is, the angle of the sail was narrower than that of the frame. It was designed around airfoil on a flat surface. The ribs had aluminum tubing ribs which were reflexed and moved the center of pressure forward. So there's very little washout in the wing. It also made it a little bit hard to control because the washout or anhedral, one or the other is needed. This had no anhedral and had no washout, so it was a little bit skitterish. Doing these tests, it felt like it was pretty near neutral trim, and turned out later that it wasn't. There was enough turbulence to upset it more than its trim problems. Look how deep that leading edge camber is, and it had the tangent mounted airfoil. Now this is at Fort Funston. It's the same airplane, and right about there I also all of a sudden knew I was in trouble because I was all the way over to the left side of the bar and it wouldn't turn that way. There was a rigging error that hadn't shown up on the smaller hill. You can see how far I'm over. I wanted to go down about then, but it didn't seem to want to. The wind was blowing about 14, and the sink rate on this glider was incredibly low, so that it just kept going up. I went down the ridgeways and figured if I could get it turned around to the our left as we're looking here is the training hill, and there's no lift down there. You can see how high it is there in a minute. You'll see it. It's coming back. The camera cuts, and then coming back, it's way up there. As it's coming back, after I managed to get it to turn around to the left, now look how high it is. And this is when I'm wanting to come down. I mean, I've never wanted to come down so bad before. The second here, I was getting really tired. I've been flying for a couple of minutes at full left deflection. And watch what happens when I relax. That's how hard the turning tendency was. It just jerked to the right. Now it started turning to the right, and I couldn't stop it. All the way to the left wouldn't stop it. Now I'm turning around, going back over the cliff into the rotor. One more turn would put me in the parking lot, so I decided to dive it in and crash it right there. When I dove, it rolled out, but I ended up landing in the rotor, which is not enough airspeed to flare. So I took it down to the training hill to do a couple of test flights and see if I could figure out what the problem was. Now, so I'll start a right-hand turn, and then all left control won't stop it, and end up spiraling in. The next shot, you can see the problem. Just in a second, right there, as it hits, right there, you can see the washout, and the right wing is a lot more than the left. There's about a 1/4 inch rigging error. This is number 22. It was the second airplane I called the Weedhopper. Number 14 was the first. I designed this one and Klaus Hill built it. I made the power package. We worked for a short period of time as a partnership, and then he split up and did the Hummer, and I split up and went and did number 23 and 24. 24 is the current Weedhopper. This is a flying wing, 22-foot 8-inch span, 10-foot root cord, 6-foot tip cord. It was pretty light at about 120 pounds. The biggest problem it had is extreme control drag. If you pull that elevator up, it dumped the lift on the wing, which is a typical problem of aerodynamically controlled flying wings. But it showed some promise, and it showed the basic lines of the Weedhopper and the pilot position, control system, and engine installation. And it was the one airplane that was shown to the investors to form Weedhopper Utah Incorporated. We had some good flights in the fall there when it's perfectly calm. The highest I ever got was about 150 feet after 20 minutes, because every time you turn it, the control drag would drop it right back down into ground effect again. To go around a turn, you have to pull back on the stick. That raises the elevator, that dumps lift, and it settles. The Weedhopper with the tail separate has much less trim drag, that's why it's so maneuverable. We had an ideal site that year for testing. It was a wheat field. They had, hayfield rather. They had mowed it down for their last crop, and then the rains didn't come till much later than they expected, so we had the use of that. It was almost a mile long, perfectly flat. We used it for about 2 minutes for testing. They're typically flying that airplane with a short span and low aspect ratio right at the top of ground effect is all the higher it wanted to go. But even that one had good pitch response, although it was a high drag penalty. Pull up, level out, sink right back down into ground effect. That was flying with a Chaparral G25A snowmobile motor, which is the same as the current Zenoa G25B ultralight engine. And on a light airplane, it can be pretty good. A pusher would have been more efficient. But it still wasn't quite enough of the kind of airplane I wanted with maneuverability and resistance to turbulence. That means a heavier wing loading and a shorter span. Although a lot of the earlier A-model Weedhoppers flew with these engines. The 242 Zenoa and the 392 Yamaha, the 347 Sachs, a few JLOs. Now this is the Model 24 Weedhopper, flying on a Zenoa engine, tuned pipe, doing propeller development. That's out in front of our first shop. We had a 400 by 8 foot gravel strip put in. Did a lot of taxiing. We knew it handled really well on the ground. Once in a while we got a propeller that worked. I ended up settling on a 36 by 14 with a little bit of washout at the tips. The freeway was about 200 feet over that fence, so we didn't make very many flights out of there. You see the wire bracing on the leading edge and the small diameter leading edge of the A model. Still didn't have any sub-fin covering. That was added later for more yaw dampening. Turbulence with the full flying rudder and just the sweep for yaw dampening, we could get the wiggling pretty good. So sub-fin covering stops that, gives it a lot steadier feel. Those little engines give a real impression of power with all the high-pitched whine and noise they make, propeller noise and everything. But they're very, very temperamental. You could carve 3 propellers to exactly the same dimensions and have one work. This is later on with finally the right propeller on it. You can see the climb rate's pretty good. I also noticed the A model didn't have as much dihedral as the B or the C. It was quite a bit slower to respond. It had a considerably different airfoil with a sharper brake, much more curve up front. It had a 2-piece rib, which is fiberglass in the front and flexible, and hard tubing in the back. But they flew okay, if you could stand the noise. 30 hours on that airplane. It's the original #1. Matter of fact, the tail surfaces and fuselage. And most of the wing components are in the current doped wing version that I have. I replaced some tubing in the fuselage and had several different engines on it. It was the test bed for the 460 development program. It was a long time before we banked it much more than that. 30-degree bank. The B model was more responsive to the controls, and the C model is even more responsive to the controls. So now we go up 60 degrees and maybe even a little bit more without the feeling of skidding around that this one had. And the more rigid leading edge helps the handling too. This is a B model flying down at Mojave in Southern California. That airplane was built by Woodhopper. It's one of the better flying B models I've seen. One of the biggest problems with a B model is it's a kit-built airplane. You'll see some that are done right and they fly beautifully, just like this one. And you see others that are just a bundle of errors and they all work against each other and they barely fly at all. Combined with pilots who don't know how to fly an ultralight, and you can have some sad performance records on some of these airplanes. The variations in construction are one of the main reasons we decided to build a ready-to-bolt-together C model. At the same time, improve the wingtips and finish work. But the day of a home-built being sold in any volume is pretty much gone in the ultralight area. It's too easy just to bolt one together in one day and go flying. One thing you notice on the B model here is when it comes out of a turn, it kind of skids to the inside. C model doesn't do that. The change in the wingtips cured that. See the wingtip there is, the front corner is open. It's got a pretty good sized wrinkle on it. Still a good flying airplane. A lot of people who heard we made changes on the C model were really worried that we might have messed it up. It's hard to believe it, but it does fly better. A well-built B model is a good airplane. They will fly a lot higher than that, but it's a lot of fun to fly at 50 to 60 feet. Of course, if you're flying for the camera, you stay close. It's one thing you notice when you see a Weedhopper flying for the camera is the precision, the way you can stay right in the frame, up close. And the positive control, you can see there's no real wobbling around or anything, it just goes where you point it. This is a doped wing plane taken off out of the field we had last year near Plain City. It changes the feel of the airplane quite a bit. It does definitely climb better, holds its speed better, maneuvers. There was a stall, a little bit sharper brake. Roll rate's a little bit better. Rudder pressure is quite a bit less. We've duplicated that in the C model by using a double surface sailcloth rudder. Matter of fact, a lot of things that this airplane does have been built into the C model by changing the wingtips and things. Series of wingovers, increasing bank, there's 45. And about 80. The doped fabric has been done by several builders who got less performance because they put automotive enamel on it or something to paint it and got the weight up to 250 pounds, but done right, it's good. This is a Gypsy. This is the first day out doing some taxi tests. You should be a student solo minimum in a tail dragger to fly this airplane, because it is 3-axis, and the tail dragger landing gear configuration is nowhere near as stable as the tricycle. Now, I don't have a lot of time in tail draggers. In fact, the last takeoff I made was like 5 years before this flight, so this being the first takeoff, I just firewalled it and held on until I got it off. I ended up switching, going across the grass a little bit, but figured rather than fight it, just let it go. Got it up, wiggled and skidded a little bit. But amazing, on the first flight, it was absolutely hands-off trim, 32 miles an hour. It was optimum, it's flying about 37. You can see it's moving pretty good. And climbing at 200 feet a minute at 37 miles an hour at about an 80 degree a day at 4,500 feet above sea level. The Gypsy is the kind of airplane many writers and many long-time aviation enthusiasts had asked for, magazine editors and that kind of people, saying, boy, if you had one that had, you know, a better LORD, a little bit of a cockpit, and 3-axis controls, you'd sell everything you could make. Well, the truth is, you don't. It's harder to build, and it's harder to fly, and it's harder to transport. And we sell 20 Weedhoppers to every Gypsy. It's an excellent airplane with double the performance figures, almost exactly right down the line. 16-to-1 glide, 165 foot a minute sink rate. Fantastic soaring machine. Got a nostalgic 1930s look to it, which is what everybody wanted. Said they wanted. It's interesting what people say they want and what they'll actually buy is considerably different. This is airborne shots from a Weedhopper shooting. You notice the Gypsy can fly slower and faster, and while the Weedhopper's running along on a full power climb, you notice the ground getting farther and farther away as the pictures go. The Gypsy, I'm just flying along with him for a while, and I'll run off to the side and play around and come back, and I'm generally going all over and staying right with him as far as climb rate. I'm slowing down at minimum speed. The roll rate's reasonable. Despite the fact that it has huge ailerons, the roll rate really isn't any better than the Weedhopper. The fact of the matter is that rudder and dihedral works better at these low speeds than do ailerons for roll control. Now, when these pictures were taken, I was running on a less than maximum power roundhead engine and running a Weedhopper prop, which is really too low a pitch for the Gypsy, and I could still pass him up with, 8 or 10 miles an hour. With that engine and that prop, it would do 54 miles an hour, and we've since, with a square head and a small carburetor, easily go over 65. Since red line is 60, we just haven't explored it any further. This is the Excalibur. That's number 29, I believe. Pusher Canard. Experiment to see what the Canards are really like, and the efficiency of the pusher, which is dramatic. That airplane at 34-foot span and 5-foot core would easily top 65 miles an hour with a sailcloth wing and no streamlining. A few minor problems, flexibility of the wing and hunting directionally, which could have been cured. The real problem with that airplane, the reason it's not in production, is if you slow down and try to flare it like a normal airplane on landing, the Canard will stall and drop the nose into the runway. That's common to most Canards. You can get out away from the ground, out of ground effect, pull the stick all the way back, and the nose will mush along. But when you get down in ground effect, you'll get a stall break, and it dives in and breaks the nose wheel. But with further development, that might do something. We'd have to put wire bracing all the way out to the wings to stop the tips from flexing. After flying this is that you might as well have a flying wing if you're going to have a Canard. A few other little things, like if you open the throttle anything below 40 miles an hour, if you open the throttle full, it'd stall the Canard and dive until it got going better than 40 miles an hour. Thrust line was a little bit high. The thing is that Canard must stall at a slightly higher speed than the main wing, and that gives you trouble. Now this is a Blaster, number 30. These Pendulum controls control trikes have been built in Europe for some time. And the idea is it shifts your weight and the thrust line, and you do get reasonably good control. This had a very inefficient wing on it, 16-foot leading edge and 12-foot keel, and a lot of flap and flutter in it. It took off at 35 miles an hour, which is way up there, and topped out at 45. But the controls worked. With a little bit of adjustment, we got it flying completely hands-off. These pictures were taken out of the back of a Pinto station wagon, so a little bit bumpy. But you can see very small control movements, and the response rate is really pretty good. Gives you weird feeling swinging back and forth. And when you push the bar forward to go up, and as it would be in a hang glider, your weight and that whole cage and the engine moves back, so the nose wheel drops when you push forward to go up. And that reverse visual feedback I found very disturbing, and it's the main reason I'm not producing one of these. The actual controllability is pretty good, but you're going to have to really teach yourself how to fly on this only. Any experience in other aircraft is going to give you problems with your visual feedback. Boy, we could build it cheap, though. There's nothing to it. This is a two-seater, number 31, flying down at Shafter. That's Rich Rudolph, myself in it. It's the same size wing as the soaring wing we sold for a while, but we beefed it up structurally to allow it to carry the weight that it's aerodynamically capable of lifting. We've had up to 470 pounds in a two-seater, and it has side-by-side seating and considerably more drag as a result than the single-seat soaring wing. It's really interesting, but it's definitely limited to calm days. Any amount of wind at all makes it very uncomfortable to fly. Control pressures are very heavy. The rudder area is twice as much as the standard Weedhopper. Wing is 6 feet longer, 34 feet, 40 square feet more area. It is a good orientation tool, though. It gives you a good feel for the speed and attitudes involved in ultralight flying. Now we limit it strictly to running down the runway, so it can always land at any point. The versions we're selling are set up with a wheel that follows on a trailing arm to keep them from ever completely leaving the ground. If that wheel drops to a certain point, it'll shut the ignition off. That way we don't have to get into licensing with it. And it is such a restricted airplane in the kind of weather it can withstand and the kind of piloting skills required to fly it that we don't want people flying out around the pattern with them. They're just really not adequate for it. You've got to really be a good ultralight pilot to fly it with reasonable safety and a passenger on board. This is a C model. There's less pieces in it, about 25% fewer pieces, and it's considerably lighter. This airplane right here weighs 167 pounds. If the FAA does its 155-pound rule like they're talking about, we can easily get the extra 12 pounds off. Now what we've done is we've modified the sail cut a little bit and the frame dimensions to get the airfoil more even. Notice there's no big lumps in it like there was in the B model. And we've put a double surface rudder on it. Strut braced the elevator, and closed and rounded wingtips on it. Gives it a much better roll rate. We've also modified the attach points on the wing struts at the bottom. The elevator construction is totally different. This airplane is designed to be produced on a production line, ready to bolt together, so things that we do easily in production couldn't be done easily at home. It allowed us to design a considerably different airplane. See how smooth those wingtips are now? They're just... We also closed in the corners on the elevator and rudder, so there's no gluing or anything there. See that wingtip again? No holes. Just smooth all the way right out to the end. We're getting about 50% higher roll rate and about 20% higher lift coefficient on the Maximum. You can also see the roll rate here. Much less skidding in and out of the turns. There's a little more buffet in the stall with it. fly a mile or two per hour slower on the same payload. Climb rate's a little bit better. Fuselage boom is now 2.5 inches diameter, and there's one less brace to the tail boom. There's more room in the cockpit. It's easier to get in and out of, and everything is anodized. Black tubing, gold fittings. Took the down thrust out of the engine, moved the center of gravity back a couple inches, took the downward incidence out of the elevator, has less trim drag, still has excellent stall behavior, still won't spin. You can see the roll rate in and out, how crisp the control response is. Flies a lot more like the doped wing than the earlier models. Cleaner wingtips allow it to retain its speed better and pull-ups and things. The greater roll response gives you a better feeling of security maneuvering at low altitudes too. Shots are taken at our new airport here. When these shots were taken, that engine didn't really have enough time on it, so it wasn't putting out full power. The airplane climbs better and performs better now than it did in these shots. Here we have the Woodhopper, number 33. It's built as a design project for Popular Mechanics. The intention is to be the lightest, the lowest cost machine with reasonable construction time that can be built at home. It uses all Douglas fir and styrofoam and fiberglass. It looks pretty flexible, and it is, but that's wood. You can see how little the wings flex when it does fly. But construction of fuselage is very similar in layout to the Gypsy. Right here it has an overhead control stick with a yoke on the bottom, yoke for rudder and back and forth for pitch. I'm changing that to a control stick that'll feel more natural. The main gear is a little further back than the Gypsy, and it ends up with quite a bit better ground handling as a result. That airplane can be built, the airframe, for about $400, and depending on the engine, you can get by for a couple $100 for an engine if you're a good scrounger. It's really a pretty good airplane. It's 32-foot span, 5-foot chord, very straightforward, just like a large stick model. It flew perfectly the first time out. I don't like the feel of the top-mounted stick and yoke, so I'm going to change that. Found the best way to turn it around is to shove forward on the stick, jam the throttle open, and turn it with the rudder. Just like an old Stearman. Don't have any brakes, though. Takeoff run. Now, this is at 4,500 feet, about 90 degrees. The takeoff run's only about 150 feet. See, the tail's up in about 20 feet. I'm swerving a little bit. That's my first takeoff. And there you are. That was more like 75 feet. Climb rate's excellent. It'll outrun a Weedhopper, outclimb it, fly slower. Of course, it's also very fragile and very time-consuming to build, in contrast to the Woodhopper. See, those wings really aren't flexing very much. Not even as much as they were wiggling on the ground under their own weight, which is typical of a wooden airplane. Visibility is absolutely fantastic because you're sitting straight upright. You don't have hardly any tubes around you, mostly wire, which you don't see. And it's neat to get up about 100 feet and just putt along in dead calm air. It takes very little power to fly it. Matter of In fact, the 460 engine doesn't even like to idle as slow as level flight power actually is on this thing. This one took us about 260 hours to build. I think if we did another one, we could probably do it in 200 hours. We plan to fly it with a Zenoa engine and the 250cc Cuyuna single. And if we can get a light enough pilot, I have a 5 horsepower Tecumseh 4-cycle engine I want to gear down and try to fly it with. It's a very efficient airplane. That doped wing, high aspect ratio, and it only weighs about 140 pounds, so it doesn't take much to keep it going. You could put a Gypsy type pod on there and have almost the performance of the Gypsy. Maybe even a little bit lower sink rate. The L/D is right around 9 with the pilot in the open, but if you ferried him in, you could get up around 13 to 15, somewhere in that range. This airplane will be in the November '81 issue of Popular Mechanics. We're selling plans for $50. Of course, every set of plans has a Weedhopper brochure in it, and we expect a lot of people to sell themselves on the idea of flying an ultralight when they get the plans and see it's too much work to do it that way and end up just going out and buying a Weedhopper kit that they can bolt together one day and fly the next, and roll up and pack around on the top of the car and all the good stuff like that. If you have a hangar and a lot of good friends, or a lot of good friends to help you move it around, this is really not a bad airplane. Lands really well, 3-point attitude, recommended. Well, that's about it. There's some more airplanes under development, but we haven't got films of them yet, and it'll be a continuing thing. The interesting thing with this whole sequence, as you can see, there's been a lot of airplanes built, and the Weedhopper combines features from very many of them. A lot has been learned about human factors, how much trouble it is to transport, set up, how fragile it is, how hard it is to build, and ended up with a Weedhopper with a maximum return and minimum hassle. There are other airplanes, but we think the Weedhopper is the best compromise.